All right, so I am trying to understand the gendered dimensions of political communication before and during Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So the time periods I looked at were for 4 months, a year before the full-scale invasion, and then the 4 months after the start of the full-scale invasion, and really trying to understand the interactions between gender, social media platforms, and times of war and peace. So the breaking down into what I did, I wanted to understand the difference in usage of Facebook and Twitter according to the time periods, gender, and language. And this is because Facebook and Twitter have varying affordances and have been utilized differently during events such as elections, war, and protest. The second question was diving into whether or not the narratives that are used by men and women Ukrainian politicians fit expectations of gender discourse. So this is related back to the war and peace hypothesis that posits that women are more pacifist and compromising, but men are more combative. So how does that come out in the actual narratives that they use on social media? And finally, how do the interaction styles of Ukrainian politicians fit expectations of gender discourse? So women are expected, or are found in research, to be more interactive and collaborative in their communication styles, while men are found to be kind of more lone wolf in their communication styles. And this is during elections and during other types of events on social media. So this is what I was really curious to understand. And I know there's a lot going on there, but I think it's really important to understand all these dimensions holistically in empirical research so that someone else can take it and there's lots of pieces, lots of findings to come out and move forward with. So again, I had those 2 time periods before and during the full-scale invasion. What I ended up collecting was about 60,000 Facebook posts and about 20,000 tweets from women and men politicians. And the analysis was done using structural topic modeling.
The politicians are from where?
From Ukraine,
okay.
Yes, before and during the full-scale invasion, and social network analysis. So some interesting findings. As for social media platform differences, on Facebook, it's likely that their audience was already their constituents. So proportion of gender did not change, proportion of language between Ukrainian, English, and some Russian, and even some Turkish did not change. But how much they actually posted, of course, increased a lot after the full-scale invasion. But their audience probably stayed the same. Twitter is where there were a lot more differences. So we had a massive uptick in the amount of women tweeting during the full-scale invasion and the amount of English language tweeting. So we have an audience shift, a target audience shift there on Twitter. So that was quite interesting that politicians actually utilize the different platforms and their affordances, being able to reach out to Western leaders more on Twitter to their advantage. Second finding for that second research question about what are the narratives being used was more about really found that women politicians were more likely to convey the human impact of the war and the need for Western support rather than pacifist views. So the women in peace hypothesis was not satisfied in that sense. Men did use more combative and military terms, so they did tick higher there. So it's kind of a mix. And then finally, women politicians did kind of fit the expectation that they are more collaborative in their communication styles because they use the at mention more. Their out degree in the network was larger than men's on average. So that was quite interesting that they did fit this communication style. And it really kind of begs the question of which style is better on social media. You would argue that lone wolf doesn't really get you too far if you're not mentioning anyone and you're not getting more interaction to get your message across. So that was quite cool. And the majority of the top people who they mentioned were Western leaders and politicians. So for the next study towards my PhD, this is the first. The second we'll be looking at the actual responses from the top mentioned by Ukrainian politicians, Western leaders, to understand the gender dimensions in interaction in digital diplomacy between Ukrainian politicians and who they reached out to and what they got back. What's the overlap there in narratives? Which ones actually kind of converged and which ones stayed far apart? Like asking for F-16 jets, maybe it's converging now, but would not have converged for a long time. Talking about the need for humanitarian support will be a very likely convergence. And what are the differences in men and women leaders on both sides there?